From most boxing superstars being bad examples for rookies, to fans tuning into MMA instead for more dynamic fighting styles, this is the real reason the future of boxing is in trouble. We gotta face it, boxing stars are a bad influence. The prime example is Gervonta Tank Davis, the boxing champ who recently found himself behind bars. Tank was involved in a hit-and-run crash back in 2020 that left 4 people injured, one of which was a pregnant woman. He pled guilty to his involvement and was sentenced to home detention for only 90 days. It was barely a slap on the wrist, and you can bet that Davis took advantage of it. He couldn't follow that simple order and moved his housing twice without permission. The judge finally took a stand and sent him straight to jail, and that's a knockout blow to his reputation. And Davis isn't the only one ruining the name of boxing. Remember Iron Mike Tyson and how he was convicted of and was given 6 years in prison. The victim, Desiree Washington, claimed Tyson assaulted her in an Indianapolis hotel room. Tyson, of course, denied the allegations and said it was consensual, but he still served jail time for it. So the fact remains he's a registered offender. And finally, let's shine a spotlight on James Kirkland, a junior middleweight contender. Turns out that Kirkland is back behind bars, this time for assault charges against a family member. Yikes. This latest arrest only adds to the cloud hanging over his boxing career. With no fights since 2012 and a string of management and promotional disputes, it's safe to say Kirkland's future in the sport is looking bleak. What kind of example are these superstars setting for future boxers? Not only that, but we have no idea where the judges' scorings come from. Take Vasily Lomachenko, for example, or after a tough loss to Devin Haney, Loma broke down in tears. Many fans believed he did enough to secure the win, but when the judges declared Haney the winner via unanimous decision, it took everyone by surprise. We can be totally biased and shout that our fighter should have won, but here's the deal. That's okay for fans, because emotions run high during a match. But when it comes to the officials of the sport, it's a whole different story. Rounds 9, 10, and 11 were clearly Loma's, and here comes Judge Dave Moretti, who gave the 10th round to Haney, which was, without a doubt, one of the most one-sided rounds in boxing in 2023. Even Shakur spoke up and said Loma won, so it's like the whole world knew Loma should have taken the W, but the judges were on another planet. The fight that could have been the fight of the year turned into the robbery of the decade. In fact, the scoring in this fight was the last straw for some fans, who said they were going to switch to watching MMA instead. Judges gotta draw that line between loyalty and honesty, and unfortunately, in boxing, that line often gets blurred. Especially if you watch that Matchroom boxing show where Anthony Joshua fought Alexander Usyk. Many fans were fuming over some questionable results. The thing is, when money gets thrown into the mix, trouble follows. Boxing doesn't have a single organization calling the shots, which means everyone involved can chase success on their own terms. And where there's no clear governing body, corruption can slip in with ease. This shady stuff ain't new. It's been happening since the dawn of boxing. Fighters want to climb to the top and make bank, but one loss can be a major setback. And you know what that means. Managers are pushing their fighters to win everything, so they can sell them for bigger and better matches. Who'd want to hype up a fighter who's always taking the L? Now, let's talk about the promoters, the folks who want to pack the house with screaming fans. They want to sell as many tickets as possible, and to do that, they gotta have good relationships with all those sanctioning bodies. It's a big tangled web, and you've got gambling organizations in the mix too. They're pouring money into the sport through sponsorships and betting. And guess what? The outcome of a match can decide how much money they make. So yeah, fights are usually rigged to serve their interests. We can't ignore the dark history of match fixing in this sport either. There's this notion that high-level boxing matches are harder to rig than lower-tier ones, but even the big boys of boxing were victims of it. Take, for instance, the legendary Muhammad Ali. Back in '76, Ali was set to face Antonio Inoki in an exhibition match, and it was supposed to be fixed. But that's not all. There are rumors surrounding Ali's fights against Sonny Liston in '64 and '65, saying that those brawls were rigged too. Maybe we could overlook this all if we have the same kind of boxing stars as before. Something's just not right in the ring. Instead of the thrilling matchups we used to get, we're stuck with fights between YouTube sensations and old boxing legends like Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. The glory days of boxing being the hottest ticket in town are gone, and what's left is a mix of aging names and attempts to spice things up with social media sensations and other famous faces. But let's face it, when a sport reaches this point, it's hard to imagine it regaining its former glory. Back in the day, we had true legends like George Foreman and Mike Tyson. These guys weren't just sports stars, they were global icons. Everyone knew their names, and their fights were events to remember. But now, well, let's just say it's not quite the same. Instead of the heavyweight showdowns we used to get, we're treated to matches featuring people like Jake Paul, who's famous for his YouTube antics, or his brother Logan, who always finds himself in some kind of trouble. Remember his wild trip to Japan? And don't get me started on the fight between Jake Paul and former NBA dunk champ Nate Robinson. Neither of them had any real boxing background, but somehow they ended up in the ring. Sure, it created a buzz on social media, but it didn't add much to the sport itself. The problem is, after the boxing superstars of the past retired, there was no one to take their place. So now we're left with social media stars and influencers using boxing as a way to boost their online fame. Not to forget that boxing is extremely one-dimensional, and that's why more fans are tuning into MMA fights instead. Boxing's stuck in the past, doing the same old thing over and over again. Jab, hook, cross, uppercut, rinse and repeat. It's getting way too predictable. Sure, there's a bit of fancy footwork and head movement, but that's peanuts compared to what MMA has to offer. It's a whole different ballgame in MMA, and fighters gotta be ready for anything that comes their way. Punches, kicks, knees, elbows, and takedowns, you name it. Boxers just aim for the head or the body to score a win. No surprises, no twists, just the same old taste every time. But in MMA, each fighter brings their own flavor into the mix. Jiu-jitsu, wrestling, kickboxing, all of that. And here's where boxing drops the ball on self-defense. Boxers ain't ready to handle a surprise kick to the face or a sneaky takedown. Nah, they're too busy perfecting their punching combos in front of the mirror. But MMA fighters? They know how to protect themselves from all angles, ready to counter any move that comes their way. In boxing, it's all about the sport, the glitz, and the glamour. But MMA, it's a different story. It's all about evolving, improving, and pushing the boundaries of martial arts as a whole. Another thing that sets MMA apart is its transparency, and organizations like UFC don't hide things when they go wrong. They share the same frustrations as us, the everyday casual fans. But boxing, it's got an inverted way of doing things. The whole show is controlled by a small group of super rich elites like I mentioned, who care more about their bank accounts than the fans. That's right. And instead of seeing the best fighters go head-to-head, we often end up witnessing fights that are major letdowns. It's also because boxing has way too many top-level sanctioning bodies. You've got the WBA, WBC, WBO, and IBF, each with their own titles for all 17 divisions. That's 68 guys who can claim to be the best boxer in the world at any given time. and it's ridiculous. But for MMA, you've only got UFC as the main sanctioning body, with just one authority and only 8 divisions to hand out titles to. That means there are just 8 dudes who can claim to be the best in the world at any moment, which is way simpler. It's no wonder why boxing's losing fans. So, from fans tuning into MMA instead for more dynamic fighting styles, to most boxing superstars being bad examples for rookies, that was the real reason the future of boxing is in trouble.